Welcome to SoundScape Books. You're listening to an exclusive audiobook recording of Silent Bloom, a psychological thriller by Vivienne Black. Like and subscribe for more content. Enjoy. Silent Bloom. Chapter 1. The Echo of 87.
The city's distant hum thrummed against Sarah Chen's office window. It was late evening, the hour when most desks emptied and the building settled into a quiet hush. Sarah, however, remained, a solitary figure hunched over a stack of cold case files. The soft buzz of fluorescent lights and the quiet rustle of paper were her only companions. She welcomed the silence. It allowed the facts to surface, unburdened by the world's clamor. She ran a hand through her short dark hair, pushing away a stray strand. Another dead end. Another victim whose story remained unfinished. A familiar ache tightened in her chest, a phantom limb of a case from years ago. That one still stung, a wound that refused to truly heal. The sharp ring of her phone startled her, pulling her abruptly from the past. David Miller's caller ID flashed. "Chen," she answered, her voice even, a practiced shield. "Got a fresh one, Sarah, and it's a doozy." Miller's voice, usually a steady anchor, carried an unfamiliar edge of surprise, almost awe. "Vance Estate, Elias Vance. The museum guy." Sarah pushed herself from the desk, the open folder of unsolved disappearances, a silent accusation. "On my way." The Vance estate sprawled behind a wrought iron gate, a sprawling testament to old money and impeccable taste. Floodlights, harsh and artificial, bathed the manicured lawns, illuminating a flurry of uniformed officers and forensics teams. The crisp, cold air carried a faint, unsettling blend of disinfectant and stale coffee. Miller met her at the front door, his broad shoulders filling the frame. He stepped aside, gesturing into the opulent foyer. No forced entry. House alarm was off. Looks like he knew his killer, or at least let them in. Sarah's eyes swept the grand space, polished marble floors reflecting the soaring ceilings, silent and still. The house felt too quiet, too composed for the violence that had shattered its peace. "Cause of death?" she asked, her gaze returning to Miller. "Poison," Miller said, his jaw tightening. He grimaced. Forensics is still trying to pin down the specifics, but it wasn't quick. He was found in his study, slumped over his desk. The study itself was a monument to wealth and intellect. All dark wood and rich leather, shelves packed with antique books. Elias Vance lay still, his face pale and slack, against a stack of art history volumes. A half-empty teacup, a delicate bone china piece, sat beside his hand. No struggle, no overturned furniture. Just a man, meticulously poisoned in his own sanctuary. Sarah knelt beside the body, her gaze sweeping over the scene. Vance's expensive silk dressing gown was undisturbed. His spectacles rested precisely on a closed book. Everything was exactly where it should be, except for the man himself. The stillness felt unnatural, a silence that screamed of careful orchestration. "See?" Miller murmured, surveying the room from the doorway. "The whole thing feels staged, almost too neat." He paused, rubbing his chin, a habit when he was thinking. Could be a professional. Or someone who wanted it to look professional. Sarah barely registered his words. Her attention had snagged on a glint beneath Vance's left hand, which rested loosely on the desk. She carefully nudged his fingers aside. There, nestled against the polished wood, was a small vintage silver locket. It was tarnished, the kind one might stumble upon in an antique shop, but its placement felt undeniably deliberate. She picked it up with a gloved hand. The clasp was intricate, a tiny, almost imperceptible catch On its smooth, cool surface, barely visible without turning it towards the light, were etched 3 words and a date. Forever, my love. October 15th, 1987. Sarah stared at the inscription. October 15th, 1987. A specific, almost defiant date left for them to find. A challenge. "Miller," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Take a look at this." Early morning reports trickled in, confirming Sarah's initial suspicions. The poison was identified. Silent bloom. A rare, discontinued Cold War-era neurotoxin. Its very name sounded ominous, a whisper of hidden dangers. Dr. Aris Cole, the lead toxicologist, sounded impressed, even a little unnerved, when he called. "This stuff is ancient, Detective," Cole explained, his voice crackling over the line. "Haven't seen a case involving it in decades. It was designed for specific, high-stakes covert operations. Not something you pick up at a pharmacy." The information sharpened Sarah's focus. This wasn't a simple robbery gone wrong. This wasn't even a typical revenge killing. The choice of toxin, coupled with the locket's inscribed date, suggested something far more complicated, a narrative stretching back into shadow. Over the next 24 hours, Sarah and Miller followed the obvious leads. Vance had no known enemies, at least not openly, but his work in the art world had its share of rivals. There was Dr. Evelyn Blackwood, a disgruntled former colleague who'd lost a promotion to Vance. Then Reginald Clark, a business partner with whom Vance had recently had a heated financial dispute. And, of course, Marcus Blackwood, a younger, ambitious curator who stood to gain significantly from Vance's sudden demise. Sarah ran background checks on all 3, cross-referencing their profiles with the locket's date. The results hit her with a quiet shock. Dr. Blackwood was born in 1972, making her 15 in 1987. Clark was born in 1968-19 in 1987. Marcus Blackwood. He wasn't born until 1995. They were all either children or not even alive on October 15, 1987, Sarah stated, her voice flat, the words hanging heavy in the air. "This locket, it can't be from any of them." Miller frowned, reviewing the printouts, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It could be a red herring, Sarah. A misdirection, someone trying to throw us off." He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples, a gesture of weary frustration. "It's not unheard of. People get creative." Sarah pushed away from her desk, the sudden movement rattling a stack of papers. She began to pace the small office, her steps restless. "No, not like this." Her voice was low, insistent. "The specific date. The rare toxin. It's too deliberate. Too much effort for a distraction." She felt the familiar pull of an unsolved puzzle, a sensation that mirrored the phantom ache of that earlier, failed case. Logic dictated she dismiss the date, focus on the living, breathing suspects. But her gut, a quiet voice she often mistrusted, insisted otherwise. To ignore it, to dismiss this impossible detail, felt like a betrayal of the truth, a capitulation to easy answers. What if she was wrong? What if this was the key? The question echoed in her mind, a cold whisper of doubt and possibility. Her eyes, sharp and restless, returned to the crime scene photos spread across her desk. The meticulously arranged study. The teacup. The books. And then, in a wider shot of Vance's desk, something else caught her eye. Beneath a stack of financial ledgers, barely visible, a corner of off-white paper. "Hold on," she murmured, leaning closer to the image, her breath held. They returned to the estate. The forensics team, packing up their equipment, confirmed the discovery. Tucked away, an anonymous letter, dated a week prior to the murder. Sarah unfolded it carefully, the paper crisp and thick, a stark contrast to the flimsy report she usually handled. The words were block-printed, cold and precise. "You know what you did back then? Time to pay up." Sarah read the line twice, the starkness of the threat chilling her to the bone. She handed it to Miller, the paper feeling heavy, laden with decades of unspoken history. The words echoed in the sudden quiet of the study, resonating with a deeper, older truth. This wasn't a red herring. It was a declaration, a gauntlet thrown down from the past. She looked at the empty space where Elias Vance had lain, the crime scene, now a portal to a buried secret. The murder wasn't just a murder, it was an echo, a decades-old score finally settled. Someone had waited a long, long time for this moment, and now they had struck. The chilling questions hung in the air, no longer theoretical but urgent. Who was the killer? And what exactly had Elias Vance done on October 15, 1987, that warranted such meticulous, long-delayed retribution? Sarah felt a cold dread settle in her stomach, not just for the victim, but for the daunting task ahead. This wasn't just a case. It was a reckoning, a tangled knot of history she was now compelled to unravel, and she had a feeling it was just the beginning of a very long, very frustrating journey.
Chapter 2: Unearthing the Past.
The next few days blurred into a monotonous cycle of interviews and dead ends. Detectives Sarah Chen and David Miller tracked Elias Vance's recent dealings, his business associates, and his few personal relationships. They spoke with Dr. Evelyn Blackwood, Reginald Clark, and Marcus Blackwood again, pressing for any connection to the locket's impossible date, October 15, 1987. Each conversation yielded nothing new. Alibis were firm, motives, if any, were too contemporary. The toxin, silent bloom, remained an isolated, chilling detail. "It's a dead end, Sarah," Miller said, dropping a stack of reports onto his desk with a sigh. "We've run every angle. Vance's financial records, his phone logs, his travel history. Nothing points to 1987. No secret families, no old grudges that track back that far. The locket has to be a red herring. Or a coincidence." Sarah didn't look up from the evidence photo she was studying. The locket lay on the glossy print, small and silver, the engraved date stark. "Coincidence doesn't explain silent bloom, David, and it doesn't explain the letter. Someone wanted him to remember what he did back then, not what he did last year." Miller leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "So what? We start digging through every missing persons report from 37 years ago? That's a needle in a haystack, Sarah. 1,000 needles, 1,000 haystacks." He respected her drive. Sarah felt the familiar knot in her stomach. The logical part of her brain agreed with Miller. This was inefficient, a chase down a historical rabbit hole with no guarantee of payoff. It was the kind of move that could stall a career, brand an investigator as erratic. But the locket, the date, the specific toxin, they hummed a different tune. It resonated with the ache of her own past unsolved case, a child who had simply vanished. To abandon this thread, to accept the easy explanation, felt like a failure she couldn't afford. A betrayal of the truth. She pushed away from her desk. "We're not looking for a needle in a haystack. We're looking for a specific kind of needle, made of a very specific metal. Cold War-era metal." Miller watched her. He knew that look. "You have an idea?" "The toxin. Silent bloom. It's rare. Discontinued. Classified. Someone didn't just stumble upon it. They had access. Or they knew someone who did." Sarah walked to the window, staring out at the city lights. "This isn't just about Vance. It's about a ghost. And ghosts leave traces in the archives." The choice was clear. Follow the conventional path, safe but yielding nothing. Or push against the system, against its resistance, to chase an improbable, dangerous historical lead. Professional prudence dictated she focus on living suspects, on current connections. But a deeper instinct, strengthened by the echo of that old, cold case, pulled at her. She had to know. The truth, no matter how distant, how painful, was worth the risk. She made the call from her office, late that night, the precinct mostly empty. Her contact, Elias Vance, no relation to Elias, was a retired intelligence liaison, a woman who understood the intricacies of classified information. Chen. Eleanor's voice was raspy, tired. "It's late. This better be good." "It's about Silent Bloom, Eleanor," Sarah said, cutting to the chase. "A murder. Elias Vance. Poisoned." A beat of silence. "That's a name I haven't heard in a while." "Silent Bloom. That's a deep-cut detective. Government issue. Not exactly something you pick up at the corner pharmacy." "Exactly. I need access. Declassified files. Anything related to that toxin, or to anything happening on October 15th, 1987, that involved covert operations." "You're asking for a lot, Chen. My clearance expired years ago, and the agency doesn't exactly hand out old secrets like candy." Eleanor paused. "Especially not to police detectives chasing a simple murder." "It's not simple," Sarah insisted, her voice tight with suppressed frustration. "And the toxin points to something bigger. This isn't just about Vance, it's about a history, a secret. Someone waited decades to use that poison." Eleanor sighed. "All right, give me the case number, I can make some calls, see what I can shake loose." "No promises, Chen. You're poking at shadows that were meant to stay buried." The next few days were a blur of phone calls and official requests, a maze of forms and permissions. Sarah felt the friction, the resistance from various agencies. But the mention of Silent Bloom, a name whispered only in certain circles, seemed to carry enough weight to open doors. Finally, a thick manila envelope arrived, unmarked, slipped onto her desk by an anonymous courier. Inside were copies of heavily redacted files, yellowed with age. Sarah spent late nights at the precinct, hunched over the documents, a mug of cold coffee at her elbow. The pages were a fragmented mosaic of blacked-out lines and cryptic codes. She squinted at blurred dates, inferred meaning from the spacing between redacted paragraphs. It was tedious, frustrating work, like trying to read a book through a veil. She scoured for keywords: toxin, covert, October, 1987. Pages turned, hours bled into each other. Her eyes burned. The air in the precinct office grew stale. Miller occasionally checked in, offering a silent nod, a fresh coffee, or just a shared presence that acknowledged her solitary, relentless pursuit. Then, on the third night, a flicker. A name, almost entirely blacked out, but the faint impression of A, P, and an R near the top. And below it, a project title, partially visible: Project Nightlight. A few paragraphs down, another phrase caught her eye: Elite Summer Camp, Blackwood Pines. Her breath hitched. She kept reading, skipping over pages of technical jargon, and Perso Sarah leaned back, the old files spread before her like a scattered puzzle. 4 missing children. A secret summer camp, a Cold War project, and Elias Vance, a respected museum conservator, tied to it all. This wasn't just a murder anymore. This was a cold case, decades old, echoing a profound injustice. The victims weren't just Elias Vance, they were those children. A grim determination settled over her. She would uncover what truly happened at Blackwood Pines. She would find out who those children were, why they disappeared, and what role Vance played. The truth, she knew, would be painful. But it was there, waiting to be unearthed. The name Blackwood Pines, once a cold line of text, now thrummed with a dark, insistent energy, pulling her towards the dense, silent forests, where its secrets lay buried. She would go there. She had to. The engine of her cruiser would be running before dawn, carrying her far from the city's indifferent grid, towards the mountains and the answers she now knew she was destined to find.
Chapter 3. Whispers from Blackwood Pines.
The air in the cruiser hung heavy. Damp pine, yes, but something else too. A metallic tang, old and bitter, that Sarah couldn't quite place. 2 hours of driving had dragged them deep into the mountains, far from the city's indifferent grid. The road had narrowed to a gravel track, then faded into overgrown dirt. Blackwood Pines. The name, once a whisper of childhood adventure, now felt like a curse on her tongue, leaving the taste of ash. Miller wrestled the wheel, steering the cruiser around a moss-slicked log. "You sure about this, Chen?" His voice was low, almost a murmur against the engine's growl. "Place looks like a postcard from a horror film." Sarah didn't answer immediately. Her gaze swept the dense tree line, a wall of shadows pressing in, no turning back. "The files mention specific coordinates," she finally said, her voice flat. "This is it." They parked near a rusting gate, its twisted iron like a skeletal hand marking a long dead entrance. Beyond it, a faint deer trail, barely visible beneath years of fallen leaves and encroaching undergrowth, vanished into the gloom. The forest pressed in, silent, watching. A metallic shriek tore through the quiet as they pushed the gate open. The sound echoed, then died. They stepped through. The path, barely a memory of human passage, wound deeper. Ancient trees, titans of the forest, clawed at the sky, blocking out the sun and casting the trail in perpetual twilight. The air grew colder, biting at Sarah's exposed skin. After a few minutes, the first outlines of structures began to emerge through the gloom. Not cabins, not the rustic, welcoming shapes of a typical summer camp. These were squat, angular concrete blocks, partially swallowed by ivy, their windows like vacant eyes staring out into nothing. "Doesn't look like much fun," Miller muttered. His hand almost imperceptibly settled on the holster of his sidearm, a familiar, reassuring weight. He was tense. Sarah felt it too. The prickle of unease that wasn't just the mountain chill. They moved towards the nearest building, a concrete hulk hunched against the forest. Its main door hung ajar, a gaping maw of darkness. Inside, the air was still and thick, cloying with the smell of damp earth, mildew, and something else. A faint, sickly sweet scent of decay. Peeling paint, broken glass, overturned furniture, the predictable wreckage of abandonment. But beneath that superficial chaos, certain details began to prickle at Sarah's intuition, twisting her stomach into a knot. Door frames, she noted, were reinforced with steel plates, rusted now but still formidable. Windows, where they existed, were small, set high and barred from the inside. This wasn't for keeping things out. In what might have been a common room, the skeletal remains of a large, heavy-duty projector sat on a platform. It faced a wall that still bore faint, faded images of geometric shapes. No flickering shadows of campfire stories here, no lyrics for sing-alongs. Miller kicked at a loose floorboard, the sharp crack reverberating through the silence. "This was no summer camp, Sarah." His voice was low, echoing oddly in the vast empty room. "This was a prison, or a training ground." His eyes, usually so steady, darted around, taking in the raw concrete walls, the bolted-down desks. His jaw was a hard line. Sarah ran a gloved hand over a smooth, cold patch on the wall, disguised by a thin layer of plaster. Her fingernails scraped, revealing the edge of something metallic beneath. She peeled away more plaster. A small, dark lens stared back at her, a hidden surveillance camera. This was not a place for children to play. This was a place for children to be watched, to be manipulated. Project Nightlight. The name now felt less like a code, more like a curse. The following morning, Sarah sat across from Dr. Evelyn Reed. Reed's apartment was a neat, quiet space, filled with the comforting scent of old paper and countless books. Dr. Reed herself, a woman in her late 70s, sat ramrod straight, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. But her eyes, though sharp, held a flicker of something far less composed. Apprehension, carefully masked. "I don't know what you're talking about, Detective," Reed said, her voice dry, brittle like old leaves. She clutched a mug of tea, her knuckles white against the ceramic. "Project Nightlight was declassified years ago. Everything relevant is public record." The emphasis on relevant was not lost on Sarah. "Everything relevant to what exactly?" Sarah pressed, leaning forward, her gaze unwavering. "A summer camp that disappeared 4 children and was inexplicably shut down on October 15, 1987. A camp that looked more like a covert facility than a place for kids to roast marshmallows." Reed flinched, a subtle tremor that ran through her rigid posture. Her gaze dropped to the tea, swirling in the mug. "You're digging in old graves, Detective," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Some things are best left buried." "Elias Vance is dead," Sarah stated, her eyes fixed on Reed, watching for any tell. "Poisoned with silent bloom, a Cold War toxin." Reed's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "He was listed in the Nightlight files as a junior psychologist, and you, Dr. Reed, were an archivist for the project." Sarah paused, letting the implication hang. "Someone is tying up loose ends. Or seeking justice. Either way, I need to know what happened." A long silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the distant hum of the city. Reed's shoulders slumped, her ramrod posture finally breaking. Fear, stark and raw, bloomed in her eyes. The choice pressed in, heavy and immediate. Protect herself, let the past remain buried beneath layers of official lies, or reveal a devastating history that could expose her own complicity, however peripheral. The weight of decades of silence, a burden she'd carried, now threatened to crush her. Finally, Reed took a shaky breath, a sound that seemed to tear at her throat. "Project Nightlight?" she began, her voice a whisper so fragile Sarah had to strain to hear. "It was never about nurturing. It was about identifying and shaping. Finding children with specific aptitudes, isolating them, and repurposing them for future intelligence work." Her gaze drifted, lost in some distant memory. "It was a desperate era, Detective. The Cold War. Fear drove us to extreme measures." A chill, deeper than any damp cold from the mountain camp, ran through Sarah. "Shaping them?" she repeated, the word tasting foul. "You mean brainwashing?" Reed shook her head slowly, a faint tremor in her jaw. A flicker of profound regret, almost grief, shadowed her eyes. "More subtle," she clarified. "Behavioral modification. Identity erosion." She paused, struggling for the right words. "They weren't missing, Detective. They were recruited. Their lives, their very selves, were taken. Erased." Her voice hardened slightly when she spoke of Vance. Elias Vance was a key figure. He believed in the program, truly. He saw it as vital for national security. A junior psychologist, yes, but ambitious. Eager to prove his methods, no matter the cost. Sarah pulled the silver locket from her pocket. The cool metal gleamed dully as she placed it on the polished wood of the table between them. "This was found with Vance," she said. "Engraved. October 15, 1987. Reed's eyes widened, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. Her breath hitched. She reached for the locket, her fingers trembling as they traced the etched date. This design," she whispered, almost to herself. "It was a common item. Inexpensive. Given to the children. A sort of false memento. A way to remember a manufactured past, Or perhaps a subtle identifier for those on the inside. She looked up at Sarah, a new, deeper terror now etched into her gaze. October 15th, 1987. That was the day the program was abruptly terminated. The official story became, 4 missing children. But they weren't missing. Their files were shredded. Their identities, they simply ceased to exist. Reed pushed the locket back across the table, as if the silver burned her fingers. Then, with a sudden, decisive movement, she reached for a small, wooden box tucked away on her bookshelf. It looked innocuous, a simple keepsake. She opened it, revealing a stack of old, yellowed index cards. "I kept these," she said, her voice stronger now, laced with a strange pride and sorrow. "Against orders. A small act of defiance, I suppose, or a burden I couldn't shed." She handed Sarah 4 cards. Each, fragile with age, held a name, a date of birth, and a few terse, chilling notes. "These are the original names of the children who disappeared from Blackwood Pines on that day," Reed explained, "and a few names of other personnel involved. Those who didn't disappear." Sarah took the cards, her fingers brushing against the fragile paper. The names stared up at her: Alana Hayes, Leo Maxwell, Chloe Davies, Marcus Thorne. She memorized them, the syllables forming a chilling echo in her mind. These weren't just names on a list. They were lives, taken, reshaped, and now potentially seeking a brutal form of justice. The implications hit Sarah with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. State-sponsored child abuse, identity theft on a grand scale. The system she believed in, the one she served, had perpetrated something monstrous. Her black and white view of justice fractured, bleeding into a sickening, unresolvable grey. The killer wasn't just a criminal, they were a victim, decades in the making. One of these grown-up children, or someone acting on their behalf, had waited for 30 years. Waited to exact their revenge. The silent screams from Blackwood Pines had finally found their outlet. And that outlet was lethal. Her next step was terrifyingly clear, yet fraught with new, profound danger. She had to find them. All of them. And she had to do it before the past, finally unleashed, claimed more victims. Before these whispers faded completely into the static of forgotten history.
Chapter 4. The Midpoint, A Stolen Life.
Over the next week, Sarah and Miller drowned in files. They worked through the 4 names Dr. Reed had provided, cross-referencing public records, missing persons reports, any government documents they could pry loose. The names were ghosts, barely there, whispers fading into static. Leo Maxwell was the first. His parents, a quiet couple from rural Ohio, had reported him a runaway in November of '87, a month after Blackwood Pines shut down. Sarah found the original police report. It was a cursory affair, handled by a local sheriff clearly out of his depth. The case had been closed quickly. No follow-up, no serious search. Just a vague, dismissive note about a troubled child. It's a cover story. Sarah pushed her glasses up her nose, a gesture of weary frustration. Her office desk had vanished under a snowfall of paper. Miller sat opposite, nursing a cold coffee, his gaze already fixed on the document. They tried to fight it. "Look!" She pointed to a barely legible memo, pulled from a dusty box file. It was from a county social worker, dated 1988, expressing concern about the Maxwells' sudden silence. The parents had initially been vocal, demanding answers, but then, abruptly, they had gone quiet. A brief, handwritten note in the margin, stark and chilling, read, "Federal intervention. Case closed." "Silenced?" Miller murmured, leaning back. His chair groaned in protest. "Like the Nightlight program itself, just wiped clean." Sarah nodded, a tight, cold knot forming in her stomach. The system hadn't just stolen these children, it had stolen their parents' right to grieve, to even search. It had stolen their very memory. A late-night discovery shifted their focus. Sarah, alone in the quiet hum of the office, had been sifting through Vance's early project notes. Reed had overlooked these sections, or deemed them unimportant, leaving them mercifully unredacted. Most were dense with clinical jargon, psychological assessments and program outlines, but one section snagged her attention. It detailed the integration protocol for a subject described as gifted but emotionally malleable. The language was chillingly detached. Vance, then a junior psychologist, hadn't merely observed, he'd advocated. He'd pushed for this child to be moved into a specialized track, one that promised faster, more complete re-education. The notes didn't name the child directly, yet the profile, the specific vulnerabilities, the exceptional intelligence, it hummed with familiarity. It matched one of Reed's index cards. Alana Hayes. Vance hadn't just been a handler, a supervisor. He'd been instrumental in her specific, brutal erasure. He had seen her as a project, a means to an end, pushing her into the deepest, most experimental corners of Project Nightlight. She had been taken and reshaped, not just by the program's cold machinery, but by Vance himself. Cold anger surged through Sarah, a bitter taste rising in her throat. Elias Vance wasn't just a victim in this twisted game. He was a perpetrator, deeply complicit in the destruction of a child's life. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was a reckoning, long overdue. The following morning, Sarah revisited the initial list of suspects. She scrolled past the disgruntled colleagues and business rivals, their faces blurring. Her eyes stopped, snagged on Alana Hayes, the successful tech entrepreneur, the not-born-yet alibi. It had felt too neat then. Now it resonated with a hollow, discordant chime. Sarah pulled up Alana's public profile again. Flawless, impeccable, almost designed. Her birth certificate listed a small town in Oregon, Willow Creek. Sarah cross-referenced its location with Blackwood Pines. Just 60 miles away. A minor detail, easily dismissed at first glance, but now it felt like a silent accusation. She dug deeper. The birth certificate from Willow Creek. The records were sparse, almost empty, no hospital name. A midwife was listed, but her license had been revoked a full year before Alana's listed birth. Sarah's gut twisted. This wasn't just perfect. It was too perfect, a meticulously crafted illusion. She requested Alana's adoption records. The response arrived with chilling speed, sealed, not by standard procedure, but by a federal court order, citing national security concerns. The very same language used to bury Project Nightlight. Then, the final piece. A deep dive into Alana's adopted parents. They had died in a hiking accident in the Cascade Mountains in 1989, 2 years after Blackwood Pines closed. The police report noted unusual circumstances. No foul play, yet a sudden, unexpected rock slide on a clear day. Their bodies were never fully recovered, just fragments. A convenient, absolute disappearance. Sarah stared at the screen. The pieces didn't just click, they slammed into place with a sickening thud. The fabricated birth certificate. The sealed adoption. The suspicious deaths of her adopted parents, who, Sarah now realized, had likely been part of the very system that placed Alana. Alana Hayes was one of the missing children. The not-born-yet alibi wasn't a mistake, not a simple oversight. It was a deliberate misdirection, a shield built from a fabricated identity. A life manufactured. Her hand shot out, reaching for her phone. Her fingers trembled against the cold plastic. She had to tell Miller. The phone buzzed before she could dial. An unknown number. She hesitated, a breath caught in her throat, then answered. A distorted voice, synthesized and cold, spoke. "Detective Chen, you're digging in the wrong graves. Some truths are meant to stay buried." A click. The line went dead. Sarah's hand fell away from her ear, slow and heavy. The air in her office suddenly thickened, pressing in, suffocating. She wasn't just investigating a murder anymore. She was being watched. Minutes later, Miller burst into her office, his face pale, eyes wide. He held his phone out, a similar message displayed on the screen. "Did you?" "Yes," Sarah said, her voice a little too steady, a brittle shell over the tremor beneath. A sliver of ice, cold and sharp, pierced her composure, but a fierce, driving resolve immediately pushed it aside. This was it. The game was over. The killer knew she was close. And the killer was Alana Hayes. They stood in silence for a moment, the unspoken weight of the threat settling between them like a shroud. The anonymous message to Vance had been a warning. This was a direct declaration of war. "What do we do?" Miller asked, his eyes, usually so steady, meeting hers with an unfamiliar flicker. His calm was gone, his voice tight with raw concern. He was no longer just her partner. He was personally invested, personally in danger. Sarah looked at the cluttered desk, at the scattered files, the ghosts of Blackwood Pines staring back from faded photos, the faces of the stolen children. Leo, Chloe, Marcus, and Alana. "We go to her," Sarah said, her voice firm, unwavering, cutting through the sudden, cold fear that had tried to claim her. "First thing tomorrow, we go to Alana Hayes." The words hung in the air, a gauntlet thrown. Her safety, Miller's safety, protocol. It all took a back seat now. The powerful forces that wanted the truth buried, the ones that had just threatened her life, would not win. Not this time. The long-delayed justice these children deserved demanded it. The moral tightrope was gone. Only the path forward remained, clear, terrifying, and straight into the heart of the danger. Tomorrow they would begin.
Chapter 5: Shadow Games.
The days that followed stretched taut, each moment vibrating with an unspoken urgency. Sarah and Miller moved with a different gait, the anonymous threat a shadow at their heels. Their first destination was Alana Hayes' corporate office. The building soared, a monolith of glass and steel, mirroring a sky that offered only a cold, indifferent grey. Inside, the reception area thrummed with a hushed, almost sterile efficiency. Alana Hayes met them in a conference room, its panoramic window framing the sprawling city. She wore a tailored charcoal suit, her posture impeccable, her expression composed, almost serene. No flicker of the woman Sarah now saw beneath the surface, the one her instincts screamed about. Miller began with practiced pleasantries, but Sarah cut to the chase. "Miss Hayes," Sarah began, her voice carefully level, "we need to revisit Elias Vance, specifically October 15th, 1987. Alana's gaze remained steady, unwavering. "I've told you everything I know, Detective. I wasn't born then. My alibi stands." Her fingers, meticulously manicured, rested on the polished table. A faint tremor, barely perceptible, ran through them. Sarah didn't miss it. "Your birth certificate, Miss Hayes, is unusual," Sarah continued, leaning forward slightly. "And your adoption records are sealed by federal order." "By federal order?" Alana finally smiled, a thin, brittle curve that never quite reached her eyes. "My family background is private. I'm a successful woman in a competitive field. It's not uncommon for powerful people to cultivate layers of privacy, or layers of fabrication," Miller added, his voice a low rumble. Alana's smile evaporated. Her jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in her cheek. "Are you accusing me of something, Detective?" Her tone remained even. Yet Sarah felt a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere, a sudden drop in temperature. She saw it then, a brief, furious flash in Alana's eyes, swiftly veiled. It was the anger of someone who had long mastered the art of control, an emotion honed by years of practice. "We believe Elias Vance was involved in Project Nightlight," Sarah said, watching Alana's face for any tell. "A program that involved children. Children who vanished on October 15, 1987. Alana pushed back from the table, rising to stand by the window, her back to them. "Project Nightlight. It sounds like something from a bad spy novel." Her voice was dismissive, but the tremor in her hands was undeniably more pronounced now. She clenched them, then slowly unclenched. The calm veneer was visibly cracking. "You're grasping at phantoms, detective. A man is dead. You should be looking for his real killer, not chasing Cold War specters." "You received a warning, didn't you?" Sarah pressed, her voice soft but insistent. "Like Vance did, an anonymous message telling you to stay away." Alana turned, her face a carefully constructed blankness. "I have no idea what you're talking about." But her eyes, though steady, held a deep, lingering ache Sarah recognized. It was the pain she'd seen in other victims, yet in Alana, it was tempered by something colder, harder. A calculating resolve. The conversation ground on for another 20 minutes. A slow, methodical erosion of Alana's composure. She denied everything, her alibis for the time of Vance's death meticulously documented, seemingly impenetrable. Yet the subtle shifts in her demeanor, her controlled anger, the fleeting glimpses of hidden trauma, were now undeniable to Sarah. The confrontation was a battle of wills, a psychological dance, and Alana Hayes, even with the turmoil beneath her skin, was a formidable opponent. Sarah left with no concrete evidence, but a chilling certainty had settled deep within her. Alana was their killer. Later that night, the city lights blurring into a distant haze beyond her office window, Sarah returned to the files of the other missing children. Dr. Reed's revelations had laid bare the horror, and now Sarah built upon that foundation, tracing the wreckage of lives. Leo Maxwell, the boy whose parents had fought so desperately against the official narrative, had been released from Project Nightlight's care in 1995. He never truly emerged. The official records cited chronic depression. In 2003, at the age of 26, Leo had taken his own life. The details were stark, clinical, a brief police report describing a quiet apartment and a note filled with whispers of voices and things that couldn't be unseen. Sarah imagined the silence of that room, the echoes of a broken mind. Chloe Davis, the second child, had been shunted through a series of foster homes after her release. She battled severe anxiety, a creeping paranoia, and a profound inability to forge human connections. She lived a reclusive life in a small town upstate, taking odd jobs, a ghost avoiding all contact. Sarah found a recent psychiatric report, detailing a woman consumed by fear, convinced she was still being watched, still being judged, a prisoner of her own mind. Marcus Stone, the fourth child, had simply vanished after 1993. No official release, no death certificate, no trace. He had been consumed by the depths of the system, his identity dissolved, leaving only a gaping void where a boy once was. Sarah leaned back in her chair, the collective weight of the files pressing down on her shoulders. 3 lives utterly destroyed, 1 erased entirely. The legacy of Nightlight was a vast, desolate landscape of wreckage. Alana Hayes, if she truly was the third child, was the sole survivor who had managed to forge a semblance of success, albeit under a fabricated identity. The thought made Alana's controlled anger in the conference room seem all the more chilling. She wasn't just a victim, she was a survivor, and perhaps a weapon forged in the crucible of her past. The following morning, Sarah met Dr. Aris Cole in a quiet, secluded corner of the university's biology department. Cole was a man of precise gestures and even more precise language, his expertise honed on Cold War biological agents. He sat across from Sarah, a formidable stack of monographs beside him. Silent Bloom, Cole stated, his voice dry as parchment, was a cruel weapon. A neurotoxin designed to mimic natural causes, utterly untraceable without specific knowledge. It was developed by a very specific, very small team during the late 70s, early 80s. How difficult is it to obtain? Sarah asked, picturing the invisible poison. Impossible for the average person, Cole said, pushing his spectacles higher on his nose. Its production ceased entirely in 85. All known stockpiles were supposedly destroyed. To acquire it now would demand either high-level government access, deep compartmentalized clearance, or a black market network of a truly specialized nature. Someone with a very long memory and very specific connections. Was there an antidote? Cole nodded. A counter-agent, more accurately. Designed for field operatives in case of accidental exposure. Not an instant cure, but it bought time. It was even more obscure than Silent Bloom itself. Even fewer people knew about it. He paused, his gaze sharpening, piercing. Whoever used Silent Bloom Detective knew the weapon intimately, and they knew how to protect themselves from it. The pieces clicked into place for Sarah, forming a grim mosaic. Alana Hayes, the stolen child, reshaped by Nightlight's unseen hand. The killer wasn't merely acting out of blind rage, they were operating with the cold precision and intimate knowledge of a trained operative. After Cole's chilling report, Sarah returned to Vance's study, a stubborn intuition gnawing at her. The forensic team had cleared the scene, yet Sarah felt a persistent sense of something missed. A vital thread, still tangled. She moved through the room, her eyes meticulously scanning the towering shelves of books, the antique furniture, the pristine surfaces that had once held Vance's carefully curated life. A faint, lingering scent of old paper and dust hung in the air, a ghost of the man who had lived there. She paused at a small, ornate writing desk tucked into an alcove. It was an aged piece, dark wood, intricately carved. The top drawer was empty, a void. But as she ran her hand along the underside of the desk, her fingers brushed against a small, almost imperceptible seam. A hidden compartment. Her breath hitched. She pressed. With a soft, almost inaudible click, a slender drawer slid out. Inside, nestled among yellowed letters and a tarnished silver key, lay a slim, leather-bound journal. Its pages were filled with Vance's precise, almost clinical handwriting. Not a diary, but research notes, dates, observations, psychological profiles. And names. The names of the Nightlight children. This was his personal research, his confession in a way, his meticulously detailed record of their re-education. The key, she knew with a jolt, likely belonged to a safe deposit box or a storage unit. This was it. The cache. Sarah stood in her office, the journal open on her desk, its contents a cold indictment. The anonymous letter to Vance, the locket, the specific choice of toxin, Alana's fractured composure. It all coalesced into a sudden, chilling clarity. The killer wasn't just seeking vengeance. They were orchestrating an elaborate exposure. The locket wasn't merely a clue for the police, it was a potent symbol, a direct, taunting challenge. The anonymous letter wasn't just a warning, it was a calculated move, designed to draw attention to Vance's past, to ensure the investigation dug far deeper than a simple murder. And this journal, this hidden cache of Vance's sins, wasn't just evidence to be discovered by chance, it was meant to be found. Alana Hayes wasn't just punishing Vance. We have to go, Sarah said, her voice firm, despite the cold knot of dread tightening in her stomach. Trap or not, this is the only way to get the full story. to drag these shadows into the light. Miller nodded slowly, his hand instinctively resting on his service weapon. The decision, though fraught with danger, was made. Outside, the last vestiges of daylight bled from the sky, painting the city in bruised purples and greys. The encroaching darkness felt less like nightfall and more like an invitation, a heavy curtain drawing back on the final, brutal truth of Project Nightlight. They had to walk into it, into whatever Alana Hayes had prepared.
Chapter 6. The Unveiling Climax.
That evening, the old government warehouse emerged from the falling light, a massive, blocky shape against the bruised twilight sky. Its windows, fractured and grimy, gaped like vacant eyes. The air hung heavy, thick with damp concrete and the dust of forgotten years. It sat unnervingly close to Blackwood Pines, a silent echo of a past Sarah desperately wanted to silence. "Stay sharp," Miller murmured, his hand already resting on his weapon's grip. The words were a formality. Sarah's pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. A cold prickle traced her skin. This wasn't merely a derelict building. It was the final, inevitable act of a decades-long tragedy. They moved, almost spectral, Miller systematically clearing each blind spot, Sarah sweeping the perimeter with her gaze. The heavy service door at the rear was a solid sheet of rust. Miller drew a set of lock-picking tools, his movements swift, silent. A series of soft clicks. Then, a low, drawn-out groan of metal. The door gave way, swinging inward to reveal a vast, dust-choked maw. Inside, the air itself seemed to drop several degrees, still and heavy. Rows of skeletal shelving vanished into the deeper gloom. A lone, bare bulb dangled from a high beam, its anemic glow barely piercing the darkness, creating a small, pale stage near the far wall. Within that stark circle, a steel desk, a chair, and a figure, Alana Hayes. Spread wide across the desk were Vance's hidden files. Yellowed pages, meticulously organized, a chilling testament. Sarah's gaze locked onto the journal, open to entries detailing subject GAMMA7, the most vulnerable child, her identity systematically erased, her mind remade. The brutal psychological conditioning, Vance's clinical observations, were starkly revealed. This was the cache. And Alana, the architect of this revelation, stood amidst the ruins of her own stolen history. Alana turned slowly, her eyes, usually a fortress of guarded emotion, now blazed with a fierce, almost desperate clarity. In one hand, she clutched a small, sleek device, its wires snaking across the desk towards a waiting laptop. "You found it," Alana said, her voice unwavering, her expression a mask. "Took you long enough." Her gaze, unblinking, fixed on Sarah, and a flicker of something raw, exposed, ignited deep within their depths. "You know who I am now, don't you, detective?" Sarah took a deliberate step forward, her hand unconsciously drifting towards the weapon at her hip. "Alana Hayes, born Chloe Miller, Project Nightlight, Subject Gamma 7. The names, spoken aloud, landed like physical blows. The stolen child. Alana offered a small, humorless smile. Chloe Miller died on October 15, 1987. The day my life was taken. The day our lives were taken. She swept a hand towards the scattered files. Vance, the architect of our erasure. He imagined he was building something new, he only ever destroyed. Her fingers went, almost instinctively, to the small silver locket at her throat. This was mine, a cruel joke, a constant, bitter reminder of what I lost. "And Silent Bloom?" Sarah asked, her voice stretched thin. "A poetic choice, wasn't it? For lives that were quietly stolen, quietly shattered." Alana's eyes held a deep, simmering rage, ancient and unyielding. Vance deserved it, for Leo, for the others, For the one who couldn't bear what they'd done to her. The air thickened, heavy with unspoken grief, with the weight of decades. Alana shifted her weight, her stance subtly altering. A trained operative, just as Dr. Reed had described. Her eyes flickered, darting to the laptop. "The world needs to know," she stated, her voice hardening, losing its earlier tremor. "Vance's files, my research, everything. It's set to release in minutes. A public reckoning." "You're going to destroy the evidence," Sarah said, her gaze locked on the sleek device in Alana's hand. "Make it look like a vigilante act. They'll bury it again, Alana. They'll dismiss you as a madwoman, an anarchist. They'll discredit everything you've worked for." Alana scoffed, a short, sharp sound. "And you'll do what, detective? Arrest me, seize these files, only to let the system bury them again? Redact them until they're meaningless, just like they did before?" She took a deliberate step back, closing the distance to the laptop. "I can't trust you. I can't trust any of you." "I understand why you did it," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the taut air, conviction ringing in every word. "I understand your pain. But this isn't the way. Not if you want the truth to truly resonate, not if you want justice for all of them." Her gaze flickered to the laptop, then back to Alana's face, pleading, "Let me do it. Through the system. It'll be messy. They'll fight. But it'll be undeniable. A legitimate exposure, not merely vengeance." Alana's eyes narrowed, a flicker of doubt, or perhaps a desperate fleeting consideration, crossing her face. Her finger, a hair's breadth from the key, hovered over the sleek device. "You expect me to believe that?" "I expect you to believe that I want the truth just as fiercely as you do," Sarah countered, her voice unwavering. "More than just Vance's death. The full story. For all the children. For the world to finally comprehend what Project Nightlight truly was." The silence stretched, taut and agonizing, vibrating between them. Alana's gaze scoured Sarah's face, her jaw clenched, betraying a flicker of so. The laptop, though dropped and askew, still hummed faintly. Its screen, a stark blue against the dim light, flickered once, then displayed a single triumphant word, "Transmission complete." A quiet, digital chime echoed in the sudden silence, a signal that the truth about Project Nightlight had just begun its journey, a reckoning forged in the crucible of both vengeance and justice.
Chapter 7. The Lingering Shadow. Resolution.
Alana Hayes sat handcuffed, a ghost in the stark interrogation room. Hours earlier she had been sharp, formidable. Now, the fight had bled her dry, leaving only a profound weariness. Beyond the closed door, the warehouse thrummed with activity. Forensics teams sifted through scattered files, cataloguing every document, every digital scrap. Vance's hidden cache and Alana's meticulously compiled research were secured. The sheer volume of evidence against Project Nightlight spoke for itself. The scramble for damage control began before the last forensic tech packed up. Higher-ups from various agencies descended, their faces grim, their voices hushed, moving with the practiced efficiency of those accustomed to burying inconvenient truths. But this time, the earth was too thin. Alana's laptop, even damaged by its fall, had managed to broadcast fragments of her compiled data to a network of encrypted servers. The full, unredacted story remained under wraps, but enough sparks had landed to promise an inferno. Days later, the official response began to coalesce into a tangle of denials, carefully worded statements, and outright obfuscation. Sarah and Miller sat in a sterile briefing room, listening. A deputy director from a shadowy intelligence branch droned on, explaining the misunderstandings and unfortunate misinterpretations surrounding Project Nightlight. He was a man with tired eyes, his voice like gravel, speaking of national security imperatives and historical context. He hinted, not subtly, at the necessity of re-redacting the recovered files, of controlling the narrative before it could destabilize public trust. Sarah felt a familiar tension tighten in her chest, a cold knot forming. She looked at Miller, who met her gaze, his expression unwavering. The unspoken weight of their shared understanding hung heavy in the air. "With all due respect, sir," Sarah began, her voice, though quiet, sliced through the director's measured tones. "This isn't about re-redaction. This is about accountability." She paused, letting the words hang. "These children had their lives stolen, identities erased. One of them committed suicide. Another became a murderer because of what was done to her." The director's eyes narrowed, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. He leaned forward slightly. "Detective Chen, we understand the emotional nature of this case, but there are protocols. National security. National security doesn't justify torture," Sarah interrupted, her voice rising now, a raw edge to it. "It doesn't justify turning children into weapons, and it doesn't justify burying the truth. Not anymore." Miller placed a hand on her arm, a subtle anchor. "The public has a right to know," he added, his tone calm but firm, a steady counterpoint to Sarah's passion. "The consequences of these actions have resonated through generations. Alana Hayes is a criminal, yes, but she is also a victim. To prosecute her in isolation, to hide the full context, that's not justice. That's complicity." The director sighed, running a hand over his thinning hair, his gaze flicking between Sarah and Miller. "You're asking for a societal reckoning, detective?" he said, the gravel in his voice more pronounced. "Do you truly understand the implications?" Sarah understood completely. The dilemma stood stark before her, a chasm. On one side, the letter of the law, prosecuting Alana, allowing the system to neatly sanitize its past, to bury the ugliness once more. On the other, the spirit of justice, exposing the government's crimes, tearing down the carefully constructed walls of secrecy. She knew the fight would be messy, agonizing, and almost certainly career-ending. The thought brought a cold dread, but also a quiet certainty. "I understand," Sarah said, her gaze steady, unwavering. "And I'm prepared for it." Weeks blurred into a relentless storm of legal battles, strategic document leaks, and furious public debates. The fragments Alana had released, amplified by Sarah's unyielding pressure and Miller's quiet, strategic backing, made a full suppression impossible. News channels seized the story. Investigative journalists, sensing blood, dug deeper, tearing at the edges of the official narrative. Soon, the very existence of Project Nightlight, the Blackwood Pines camp, and the missing children became a national discussion, inescapable. Public outrage roared, a visceral wave. Editorials condemned the government with blistering prose. Congressional offices were deluged with calls for investigations. For the first time, the families of Leo Maxwell and the other Nightlight victims, silenced for so long by official indifference and veiled threats, found their voices amplified. They finally received answers, however brutal, to decades of unexplained disappearances and deliberate stonewalling. Their grief, once a private, isolating burden, became a shared public sorrow. It was a messy, painful truth, but it was finally, irrevocably, out. Months after Alana Hayes' arrest, Sarah stood by her office window, gazing out at the sprawling city. The Nightlight case had consumed her, reshaping her once absolute view of justice, blurring its sharp edges. Alana awaited trial, charged with murder. Her defense hinged on her status as a victim of state-sponsored trauma, a perpetrator driven by profound, systemic injustice. The legal system grappled with it, just as society contended with the broader implications of government overreach. There were no easy answers, no clean lines to be drawn. The closure, Sarah felt, wasn't the neat, satisfying click of a perfectly solved puzzle. It was a weary, profound sense of release, a weight lifted, knowing she had brought a necessary, if painful, truth to light. Justice, she had learned, wasn't always about convictions. Sometimes it was about the stark, undeniable act of exposure. The silver locket, found clutched in Vance's hand, rested on her desk. It had been cleaned, its intricate engraving of October 15th, 1987, now sharp and clear, no longer merely a piece of evidence. It had transformed into something else entirely, a symbol, heavy with unspoken stories. Sarah arranged for it to be given to the family of Leo Maxwell, one of the stolen children, a tangible link to a past that could no longer be ignored, a memento of a life violently interrupted. Other families of Nightlight victims were offered similar tokens, small, hard-won acknowledgments of immense, decades-long loss. Later, Sarah picked up a faded photograph. It was a grainy image retrieved from Vance's files. A group of children, forced smiles on their young faces, standing stiffly in front of a rustic cabin at Blackwood Pines. She recognized Alana, younger then, her eyes already holding a hint of the unyielding steel that would one day define her. Some wounds, Sarah knew, never truly healed. The spectre of Project Nightlight would linger, a stark, indelible reminder of the devastating cost of secrets, the crushing weight of history. But the truth, once exposed, possessed a different kind of power. It couldn't erase the pain, but it began the arduous process of understanding. It allowed for remembrance, for the stolen lives to finally be seen. Yet she remained, unyielding in her pursuit of honest answers, forever dedicated to wrenching truths from the deepest shadows, no matter how uncomfortable, no matter how profoundly buried. The world, she knew, desperately needed them.
Thank you for listening to this SoundScape Books recording. We hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe so you don't miss our new releases. Goodbye for now.